Brook Dixon is our guest. He's the MD for Delos Delta. They talk all about smart cities and making sure that businesses are as equipped, not only to look after all the information that we have to gather these days in this brand new, exciting world of ours. But Brook, the thing I want to challenge you with is there have been some really uncomfortable moments, especially in the last week, where the Nine network, which is a host to newspapers, to radio stations, and of course their television arm, has been almost crippled by a cyber attack. Now that's, you can imagine the information they have at hand, and a lot of it confidential. The last thing they want is for prying eyes or for people to be invading their space. How can businesses protect themselves from cyber attacks of this order from nationals that are very keen to do more than just steal? They want to damage as well.
Yeah, good question, George. If only I had all the answers, I'd be paying a lot of money. But in the digital world, cybersecurity will always be an issue. It is part and parcel of the digital world. What is critical, though, is that as we further engage and further enmesh ourselves in digital technology and digital infrastructure and digital services, that we pay an increasing amount of attention to cybersecurity and make sure that we have expert advisors on our side, we have the policies and protocols in place, and that we have the accountability structures internally. There's no silver bullet here, George, but it just means an increasing level of focus in the organisation and not taking things for granted and not treating this as just a minor risk, because this is not a minor risk.
No, and every member of the staff plays a role in protecting the organisation, don't they? Because one keystroke or allowing one or accessing one email can create an enormous amount of problems. The thing I want to touch on, though, the last year or so, we've been gathering an inordinate amount of data on each and everybody because of wherever we've had to go, we've had to use our QR codes to get us into the various places and allow us to get on with business. Now, the storing of all that information and using all that data, how can we do that better than we are at the moment? And just how important it is, not only to have it parked in some safe server, but to be able to access it as well and use it productively.
Yeah, good question, George. And really, the collection of data through the COVID crisis has really raised this issue and brought it to a lot of people's attention. And so that's a fantastic example of a whole bunch of data being collected, purportedly for a range of very good reasons. And indeed, it has been fantastic at contact tracing and so forth, and has saved us a lot of drama and given us a lot of economic benefits. But of course, the other side of the coin is, what are the security risks if that data gets breached or the wrong people get their hands on it? And of course, it's incredibly valuable. But the same proposition needs to be considered if you're in government or in the private sector. We are increasingly collecting terabytes and terabytes of data. It is going up at an exponential rate. One of the big concerns that we have at Delos Delta, George, is that we are collecting data for its own sake. It is not being analysed. It is not being visualised. It is not being shared. It is not being given to decision makers to allow them to make useful decisions at the right time. So we do a lot of work with our clients and actually putting in place the fundamentals to make sure that data is being collected for a reason and used to good purpose and protected and secured from those risks that we've been talking about.
Okay, so how then do we move it to the next level? How do we genuinely get smart and access it in a way that'll benefit all of us?
Yeah, so let me give you an example, George, and I think parking is a great example here. We're all aware that our parking systems are becoming more intelligent, collecting of real-time information about where we're parking, what the utilisation rates, what the congestion rates are. Now, this sort of data is incredibly valuable, not only for those who are wanting to park, about where they can go to reduce circling times and so forth, but incredibly useful to local governments and traffic planners to better plan parking, to make sure that there's capacity there and to ensure that there's turnover in busy business districts. So what these local municipal authorities need to do, and the transport authorities, is actually put in place very clear, deliberate performance frameworks so that they know what data they need to collect, they know how to analyse it, they know how to measure what's good performance and bad performance, and they know how to send it to decision makers so that they can improve the parking system and improve the experience of those people are parking. It's pretty fundamental stuff, George, and pretty basic stuff, but I can assure you that we see it honoured more in the breach.
Brook Dixon, you raise an enormous point there. Our infrastructure ministers right around Australia will be very keen to have access to that sort of information. But there's a whole lot of other data, and each and every one of our smartphones is gathering every day, and I'm talking about our health. Health data is the next big growth area. We're seeing app after app after app, and we're seeing wearables now arriving. Now, what do you think all those wearables are gathering? Data. Where do you think they're sending it? To various places. How do we have the technology now to break it down and to pick the eye teeth out of that info and put it to good use to help us?
Yeah, George, we do. It is a Gordian knot, I have to say, though, because what's been happening in the internet world and the digital world is very much, it's been running ahead of regulations and policies worldwide. So they can do a whole bunch of things through the apps that collect data and use data for commercial value.
Yep.
And not much thought has been given to public value. So our governments, both local, state, federal, and our international governing bodies need to do more in terms of regulation and working with the private sector to ensure that all that fantastic data that's been collected by these private companies can also be put to good use for public value, to understand what's happening in terms of our health, to understand what's happening in terms of traffic movements, to understand what's happening in terms of people's safety. All these elements are being monitored via our mobile phones and via apps that we've got on there. But as I said, the big problem is they're being used for private value, but they're not being used for public value. A quick example,
Yep.
Uber does a lot of collecting of data for their own purposes. A lot of very smart jurisdictions, local governments, state governments and so forth, have brokered MOUs with Uber to ensure that they can also use that data to better manage and plan traffic and transport and roads in those cities. So that's just a nice little example, George, about how the public sector and private sector can come together to use data in really productive ways that benefit citizens and benefit people that live in cities and regions.
I bet you it doesn't come at no cost, though. I bet you there's a price on that information.
It depends, George, on how good a negotiator the municipal authority is or the state authority is, to be honest with you. So obviously Uber and the like, they would love to sell that data, and in many instances they do sell that data, but where they need to broker a regulatory arrangement and an agreement with that authority,
Yep.
oft times they are able to, or they are inclined to share that data because it's a quid pro quo there.
Look, you've opened up a whole can of worms. It's really exciting stuff too. I've sat down and now, just as we were talking, thinking through all the mountains, as you said, the terabytes and terabytes of information and data, and how in the right hands it can be used to great effect. Are governments smart enough? Do we have information experts within those governments who can see a way of harnessing all that data and putting it to good use, and at the same time keeping us all safe from intrusion and being misused as so many people fear?
Yeah, that's an absolutely perfect point there, George. Look, I think in many governments there has been holes in their capability and their attention on this issue. I think they are starting to gear up from what I can see, but certainly they can do more in terms of accountability, responsibility, training their staff up, building partnerships with the private sector and so forth. They're heading in the right direction. More needs to be done. And it's certainly, as I said, a lot more attention needs to be given to the regulatory environment to ensure that there is obviously private value being delivered through the digital marketplaces and multinationals, but also that public value being delivered. But more to be done in this space, George. And I trust that our state governments and our federal governments continue to invest in these responsibilities and these structures, because we desperately need some government leadership on this front.
It certainly brings you a whole new meaning to the term information is key. This is information at our fingertips that we have access, that's already in huge vaults and servers, that needs to be, one, harvested, as you touched on, and in a way that means it's not destroyed and it's put to good use. It's just a fantastic Again, thinking outside the square, Delos Delta, well done. Brook Dixon, the MD who does so much of their aspirational thinking, is pushing it again to think even further about how much we need to plan ahead to harness and make better use of that tremendous data that exists out there. You've got me thinking now. We've had enormous amounts of data that we've gathered, even in the last year alone, Brooke, doing stuff like interviews of ours. We've got to be smarter at the way we harness that information and how we use it next.
Totally, George. Look, data is the new oil, as they say. It is an asset, and it is increasingly an asset. We live in the information age, we live in the digital age. This is where the economy is going. This is where public policy is going. And there is fantastic possibilities, fantastic intersections here. As I said, I really see that our public sector needs to catch up. We can't keep letting the private sector street ahead and our public environment, our regulatory environment,
fall behind,
catch up. So lots of possibilities there, George, and very happy to chat more about this again.
Thank you for opening my eyes. Thank you for opening my eyes. I appreciate it. Brook Dixon, who, as I said earlier, the MD at Delos Delta, who do an awful lot with smart cities and pushing the envelope, getting us to think outside the square. And as he touched on just a moment ago, we're only going to be as brave as our imaginations allow us to be. Thank you, Brook.